A flatbed trailer stacked with raw pine lumber pulls up beside an old barn, and three young women start unloading it board by board, while a handful of ranchers lean against a truck nearby, arms crossed. One of the men laughs and asks if they are building a clubhouse. The tallest of the three, a woman with grease already on her jeans, ignores the comment and starts measuring a sheet of plywood for the first cut. Another pulls a cordless drill from a toolbox and begins sorting screws by length into a muffin tin, a trick she picked up from a woodworking video the week before. The third unrolls a hand-drawn diagram across the tailgate, corners weighted down with rocks against the wind, showing dimensions nobody standing nearby recognizes yet. To the men watching, this looks like a hobby project that will not survive its first winter. What they do not know yet is that the boards being cut into panels are the opening move in a plan to solve a problem that has been draining money off this ranch for 3 seasons running. The problem is gophers, and more specifically, the ground squirrels that have turned nearly 40 acres of pasture into a minefield of burrows and collapsed tunnels. Cattle step wrong in the soft dirt and come up lame. Hay equipment hits hidden mounds and breaks sickle bars, and one bent guard on a swather cost more to replace last summer than the entire lumber order sitting on the trailer now. The ranch has tried the usual answers. Poison bait stations worked for a season before the population rebounded even larger than before, since nothing was left in the field to hunt the survivors, and the following year's litters faced no predation pressure at all. Traps take hours of daily labor for a handful of animals a day, nowhere near enough to matter against a colony numbering in the thousands. A neighbor once suggested flooding the burrows with a garden hose, a method that works on a single tunnel on a lucky afternoon and accomplishes nothing across 40 acres of interconnected ones. The ranch owner, an older man named Russ, who has farmed this land his whole life, has mostly accepted the damage as a cost of doing business, the same way he accepts a dry summer or a slow calf market. His niece has not accepted that, and she has spent the last month reading about barn owls between shifts at her regular job, printing out research papers at the library because the ranch internet connection is too slow to load them reliably. A single barn owl family, she has learned, can eat more than 1,000 rodents in a single breeding season, sometimes closer to 3,000, when a pair raises 2 broods and the young stay nearby afterward. Unlike poison, an owl does not leave a corpse full of anticoagulant that can move up the food chain and kill a hawk or a coyote that scavenges it. Unlike traps, an owl hunts at night, when the ground squirrels are least alert and most active near the surface. The catch is that barn owls do not naturally have many places to nest on a modern ranch. Old barns get renovated or torn down, hollow trees get cleared for pasture, and without cavities to raise young in, the birds that would otherwise be doing this work for free simply are not around to do it. So the plan is not to trap owls or import them. It is to build the box a hollow tree used to provide, put 12 of them up around the property in the right places, and let the birds that already pass through the area decide to stay. The first box comes together over a weekend, built from 1/2-inch exterior plywood with a floor about 14 inches square and walls nearly 2 feet tall enough to keep owlets from falling out and to give the female room to nest below the entrance hole rather than directly under it. The entrance itself is a rough oval roughly 6 inches across, cut high on one wall so a raccoon, reaching in from below, cannot get an arm all the way to the nesting floor. A few drainage holes go into the bottom panel, along with a shallow bed of wood shavings once the box is finished. It looks simple on paper. Getting it right takes most of the first day just on one box, largely because nobody involved has built anything like it before, and the first entrance hole gets cut in the wrong wall entirely. By the second box, the process moves faster. The three of them split the work, one cutting panels to size with a circular saw, one assembling frames with exterior screws so the box can survive years of rain without the joints, working loose, and one sanding down rough edges so a bird's wing feathers do not catch splinters on the way in. They add a hinged side panel to each box, fastened with two galvanized latches so the interior can be checked and cleaned out between seasons without tearing the whole structure apart. A short row of horizontal kerf cuts goes into the interior wall below the entrance hole. Rough grooves meant to give and permit an owlet's talons something to grip when it is climbing back up after a fall, a detail the niece found, buried in a footnote of one research paper, and almost skipped entirely. Within 4 days they have 12 boxes finished, stacked in the machine shed waiting to go up, each one labeled in marker on the base, with a number that will later match a spot on a hand-drawn pasture map. Russ walks past them once, shakes his head, and says nothing. Mounting the boxes turns out to be its own problem. The plan calls for setting each one on a wooden pole about 12 feet off the ground, high enough to be out of easy reach of climbing predators and clear of the sightline that a great horned owl, one of the barn owl's few natural predators, would use hunting from a fence line. Digging 12 post holes by hand across pasture that has not seen a shovel in years takes far longer than anyone expected, and by the 4th pole the auger has hit rock twice and needs regrinding. They end up mixing quick-set concrete around each post base in the evening heat, racing the clock before it sets up too fast to adjust the pole's angle. 2 poles go in slightly crooked. One will have to be redone entirely a week later once it becomes clear the box is tilted enough that rainwater pools on the floor instead of draining out. Spacing the boxes matters more than any of them realized going in. Barn owls hunt over open range but are territorial about their actual nest site, and boxes placed too close together sit empty while the birds crowd toward whichever one claimed the territory first. The plan, worked out from a wildlife pamphlet and a few phone calls to a regional raptor rehabilitation center, spreads the 12 boxes, roughly a quarter-mile apart in a loose ring around the pasture, favoring the edges near fence lines and windbreak trees where owls naturally like to perch and scan for movement before dropping down onto prey. The first 3 weeks after the boxes go up are quiet. No owls move in. A pair of starlings claims one box and has to be cleared out before they can wall off the entrance completely with nesting material, which would make the box useless for owls entirely. Another box gets a family of raccoons investigating it at night. Caught on a trail camera, the niece sets up out of frustration, though the animal cannot actually reach past the recessed entrance and eventually gives up. Russ starts making comments again, this time less about clubhouses and more about how many pounds of lumber just went to waste standing empty in his pasture. It is a retired wildlife biologist from the county extension office, brought in after the niece calls asking why nothing has moved in, who finds the real issue on a walkthrough of the property. He arrives with a clipboard and a pair of binoculars slung around his neck, and spends the first hour simply walking the fence lines without saying much, stopping now and then to note the angle of a box relative to the nearest tree line. He points out that several boxes are mounted facing directly into the prevailing wind, which drives rain straight through the entrance hole during storms and leaves the nesting floor damp, something a barn owl scouting a site will avoid without ever needing to see inside. 2 more boxes sit too close to a stand of old cottonwoods, where great horned owls are already roosting, effectively putting a predator on watch beside the very site meant to attract barn owls in the first place, since a great horned Owl will kill a barn owl, given the chance, and both species know it. He also notes that fresh-cut, resin-heavy pine holds an odor that can take a full season to fade, and suggests the newest boxes simply need more time weathering before a cautious bird will commit to raising young inside one. Almost as an aside, he mentions that a light dusting of wood shavings alone will not hold up under a growing brood the way a deeper bed mixed with a little dry grass will, since barn owls do not build a true nest and instead rely entirely on whatever loose material is already sitting on the floor to cushion the eggs. Rather than start over, the fix is targeted. The two windward boxes get repositioned to face away from the prevailing wind, a job that means pulling posts back out of dried concrete with a chain and truck, something none of them enjoyed doing twice in one summer. The boxes near the cottonwoods get moved a quarter-mile further out, closer to the pasture's edge where the ground squirrel damage is actually worst anyway. The rest are left alone to weather through the fall and winter, with instructions to be patient rather than keep opening the boxes to check, since repeated disturbance is itself a reason a scouting owl will pass one by. By late winter, a trail camera catches the first sign of real interest, a barn owl perched on the entrance ledge of one of the relocated boxes for several nights running before finally disappearing inside. The footage is grainy and lit only by the camera's infrared flash, but the shape is unmistakable, a heart-shaped white face turning slowly to scan the pasture before the bird drops from the ledge and vanishes into the dark interior. By early spring, pellets, the compressed, indigestible remains of fur and bone that owls cough up after digesting a meal start turning up on the ground beneath three separate boxes, small gray ovals scattered in the flattened grass like something dropped rather than grown there. Breaking one open with a pair of forceps, following instructions from the extension agent, reveals it is packed almost entirely with the small skulls and leg bones of ground squirrels, exactly the animal the whole project was built around, along with a scattering of tiny vole jaws mixed in. It is the first hard evidence, more convincing to Russ than any pamphlet or phone call, that something is actually working, and he takes one of the pellets into the house to show his wife before he will even admit out loud that the boxes were a good idea. Over the following weeks, more boxes show activity. Feathers caught on the entrance edges, whitewash streaking down the outside wall below the hole, a sure sign of an occupied nest, and eventually the faint hissing calls of owlets audible from the ground on quiet evenings. By the time the breeding season winds down, 6 of the 12 boxes have hosted nesting pairs, with the other 6 either claimed later in the season by second broods or still sitting empty, likely to be tried again the following year once they have weathered further. The harder number to pin down is what all of this actually did to the ground squirrel population, and here the ranch takes a more careful approach than simply trusting a gut feeling that things look better. Before the boxes went up, the niece had already walked a set grid across the worst 30 acres with a GPS unit, borrowed from a cousin, counting active burrow entrances as a rough census, since an active burrow is generally kept clear of debris by the animal using it, while an abandoned one fills in with blown dirt and dead grass within a season. Each count gets logged against a numbered flag left in the ground, so the following survey can be walked along the exact same line, rather than a rough approximation of it. She repeats the same walk the following fall, along the same transect lines, counting the same way, in similar weather, at roughly the same time of day to avoid skewing the numbers with animals that are simply less active in the heat. The number of active burrows has dropped by more than half, combined with pellet analysis from the boxes, which a local extension agent helps roughly quantify based on typical prey remains per pellet and estimated pellets produced. per owl family over a season. The estimate for ground squirrels removed by the resident owls across that first full year lands close to 3,000 animals, a number that lines up closely with published research on barn owl predation rates for family groups raising multiple broods. The agent is careful to note that the figure is an estimate built from averages rather than an exact body count, since nobody is standing beneath the boxes each night with a clipboard, but even a conservative version of the math puts the total well into the thousands, more than any trap line on the ranch has managed across a comparable stretch of time. Russ is the one who eventually brings it up to the ranchers, who laughed that first afternoon, mentioning at a co-op meeting that his hay equipment has not hit a gopher mound all season, and that he has stopped restocking poison bait entirely. Word moves the way it does in a small ranching community, one conversation at a time, and within a month the niece is fielding calls from 2 neighboring operations asking whether she would consider building a set of boxes for their own pastures. One of the callers admits he was among the men leaning on the truck that first afternoon, and he does not bring it up again after that. She says yes, this time with a clearer set of instructions in hand, oriented away from prevailing winds from the start, spaced further from mature trees that already host competing predators, and weathered before mounting whenever the schedule allows it. The lesson underneath all of it is not really about owls or gophers specifically. It is about working with a predator relationship that was already present on the landscape before people started clearing it away. Barn owls did not need to be trained or purchased or imported. They needed a place to nest that modern ranching had removed without ever meaning to. And once that piece was put back, the birds did the rest of the work themselves, every single night for free, without a single ounce of poison entering the soil or the food chain above it. By the second spring, the 12 original boxes have become 14, with 2 more added along a fence line, where burrow activity has started creeping back in from an adjoining property that has not adopted the same approach. The trail camera footage has grown into a small archive stored across a shared folder on the niece's laptop, owlets fledging in a scramble of white down and half-grown feathers, adults returning with prey items clutched in their talons before ducking through the entrance hole, the occasional standoff with a great horned owl that decides to investigate a box too closely and gets driven off by a smaller, faster bird defending a clutch of eggs. None of it looks dramatic from a distance. It is a wooden box on a pole in an empty field, easy to drive past without a second glance. But underneath that plain exterior is a working solution that costs less each year than a single season of poison bait once did, that requires no daily labor beyond an occasional check of the boxes and a fresh layer of bedding material each fall, and that has turned 3,000 rodents into pellets scattered on the ground instead of collapsed burrows under a herd of cattle. The ranch still sees ground squirrels, and it always will. Barn owls do not erase a rodent population any more than a poison program ever truly did. What the boxes changed is the balance, tipping a fight that used to run entirely in the rodents' favor back towards something the land can absorb without a sickle bar getting bent or a calf pulling up lame in a soft patch of dirt. Russ has started pointing the boxes out to visitors now, standing at the fence line and explaining wingspan and hunting range with a confidence that suggests he has forgotten he ever doubted the project at all. His niece lets him have it, mostly, though she keeps the printed research papers from the library in a folder in case anyone asks a question he cannot answer. The ranchers who laughed at 3 women unloading lumber that first afternoon are the same ones now asking where to buy the plywood, standing in the same spot by the same barn, only this time taking notes instead of jokes.